my lovely makers out there. This is Sheryl with Minerva, and today we'll be doing a sew along of McCall's pattern 6696. So McCall's pattern 6696 is a customizable shirt dress pattern that will allow you to choose the bust size, which will help you to get a more perfect fit. You can choose with a sleeve style that you use, so it can be long sleeve, short sleeve, or no sleeve at all. There are two different skirt styles, so you can either have a straight skirt or a fuller skirt. And lastly, if you do decide to make it out of a lace or a sheer fabric, there is a slip pattern to help give you some coverage under those sheerer fabrics. I think between the versatility of the pattern, as well as the fact that shirt dresses are a great wardrobe staple, that this will quickly become a favorite. In addition, this is a great skill builder. So during this sew along, we'll be going over collars as well as button and buttonholes. And I do know that sometimes those aspects of a pattern can be really intimidating, but we'll take you through it and we'll all get through it together. So let's get started. We have everything you need for this project right here at Minerva, so let's take a look at what you'll need. First, you'll need the pattern. It comes in two different size schemes, so once you measure out your sizes, you'll be able to determine which pattern you need to get. Next, you'll need something beautiful that you want to construct. I use this Digi Paradise fabric, which is a cotton. Next, you'll need buttons, bias tape, matching thread, which I love Gooderman, it's a great brand, and fusible interfacing. As a special bonus, if you join the Minerva Craft Club, you can get a 10% discount on all of your purchases. Okay, now that we have selected the style that we want to make as well as the appropriate size, we need to go ahead and start cutting out all of these pattern pieces. So I tend to like to use a rotary cutter that I use just for paper, as well as a rotary mat to cut out my pattern pieces. I just feel like it's a little bit faster. So just a tip for these multi-sized patterns, if you do feel like at some point you'll want to sew this in a different size, you'll want to make sure that you preserve the pattern pieces. So the best way to do that is to go ahead and trace all of the pattern pieces that you need for your style onto a separate piece of paper. Or you can just trace the pattern piece directly onto the fabric. Now, if you do think that you're going to be just making multiples of this dress, which I think you probably will, because Minerva has tons of great fabrics for the shirt dresses. And as I mentioned before, shirt dresses are just such a wardrobe builder. I anticipate you'll be using this a number of different times, so you may just want to go ahead and cut this out onto a fresh piece of paper. Now that we have all the pieces of the pattern cut out, the next step is to go ahead and transfer all of these pattern markings, so these pleats, these dots, these notches, onto the wrong side of our fabric. This will help us appropriately attach the pieces and make sure that everything matches up nicely. I do like to use tracing paper in order to transfer my markings. I use the tracing paper along with a tracing wheel. Now, there are a number of other different ways that you can do it. This is just my preferred method, but no matter what you do, the most important thing is to make sure that the marking material that you use is easily removable from your fabric. You don't want to end up having shadows or leftover markings on your finished garment. So we'll go ahead and start this marking. We have two darts, one here for the side dart and one here for the waist dart. So we will need to pin these darts together, matching the two legs, so that way we can prepare to sew. Anytime a project calls for gathering your fabric, one of the easiest methods to do this is to increase the stitch length on your machine to the longest stitch length that is available to you. For me, that's 5 millimeters. I'll use this 5 millimeter stitch to gather the upper and lower edges of piece number 4, which is the bodice back. You'll be sewing these gathering stitches between the circles on both the upper and the lower edges. We will now be attaching piece number 5, which is the yoke back, to the back bodice. To do this, you'll want to match the circles and ensure that the gathers are adjusted so that they fit in between the entirety of the circles. You will now stitch this with your regular stitch length. This method of preparing the facing that we will start for the yoke back will be reiterated multiple times throughout this project. So we'll start by marking a 5/8 of an inch seam and then pressing that toward the wrong side of the piece. Once you have finished pressing the seam, you will want to trim it to 3/8 of an inch. We will now attach the yoke facing to the back bodice. This is one of the few times in sewing where we will not be sewing things with the right sides together. So what we will do is we will put the right side of the yoke to the wrong side of the back bodice. We'll match all the markings and stitch straight across the seam. Next, we will be attaching the front bodice pieces to the back bodice. On the table, I have placed my back bodice with the right side down. However, the right side of the yoke facing is facing up. I have my front bodice pieces with the right side down toward the table. And as you can see, as I'm lifting up the yoke, I can then pin the right side of the bodice front to the right side of the bodice back at the shoulders. To complete the shoulder seam, we will be folding the pressed edge of the yoke facing over the shoulder seam, and then using a needle and thread to hand stitch or slip stitch that edge over the shoulder seam. Hand stitching is not one of my favorite things to do. However, it does give a very professional and beautiful finish to the seams. Next, we will pin the front bodice to the back bodice at the side seams and stitch. Though it may be tempting to skip it, this next step is actually pretty important. As with any curved edge, it has a high risk of losing its shape. This can be prevented by stay stitching, which means stitching a ½ inch away from the raw edge. We will be finishing the raw edge of the armhole with single fold bias tape. In order to prepare it, you will need to lightly press out one of the folds. To help guide us as to where we need to put the fold of the single fold bias tape, we will be marking the seam line on the right side of the armhole. Now, again, if you are marking on the right side, you do need to make sure that you're using something that is very easily erasable. And as you do mark, you want to make sure that you are getting it right on that 5/8 of an inch seam line. Now that we have completed our marking, we will place one of the folds of the bias tape on those markings and pin that bias tape to the seam line. Next, you will align your needle and your presser foot such that you are stitching directly in the fold of the bias tape. This will ensure that that fold is attached directly to the seam line. After you've sewn the bias tape to the armhole, you'll notice that you have two tails that will need to be covered. So I do this by folding over one tail onto itself and then folding the other tail into the first tail and then folding them both up together. This can be a little bit tricky, so you may need to rewind this part a couple of times. But if you do have any questions, leave it down in the comment section for me and I'll explain it further. After trimming the seam allowance, you'll want to fold the bias tape toward the inside of the bodice. That will help you to be prepared to slip stitch the bias tape over the armhole seam. We are now moving on into preparing the waistband. The first step in this is taking piece number 8, which is for the carriers, and pressing this so that we can cut it into the appropriate sections. You'll first want to go ahead and fold the carrier in half, and then bring the raw edges toward the center fold that you pressed in half. Next, we'll take our carrier over to the machine and stitch it very close to the folded edges. The carriers can now be cut into 4 equal pieces. Next, we'll be taking piece number 9 and attaching our 4 carriers to this piece. As you can see, piece number 9 has several pairs of squares that you will be using as your markings to attach the carriers. So it's very important that you do use the interfaced piece for the carriers. So what you'll do is you'll take the carrier, you'll find your markings, which are the squares, and you will center your carrier over the marking and pin it. As you can see, they have allowed for a little bit of extra length. A couple of things that might make this easier is if you do make the markings of the squares on the outside with something that you can easily remove. And after you repeat the attachment of the carriers to this piece, you'll then base them in place. And next up, we'll be attaching the band to the bottom of the bodice. We will now be attaching our interfaced prepared band with the trimmed carriers to the bottom of our bodice. The first marking that you look for is the double notch. So the double notch marking will go with the double notched marking on the band. Next, you'll look for the square on the band and attach that to the side seam of the bodice. Next, you'll match the center of the bodice to the center of the band. Again, you'll match the square to the other side seam. And then next, the last double notch. As you can see, the length of the bodice is still a little bit more than the length of the band, so you do have some gapping over here. So basically what we'll need to do is take our gathering strings and gather this up until the lengths of the two pieces match. So this needs to be gathered just a little bit more so that there is no longer a gap there. And now you can see that the X, or the circle, on my band now matches with the X, or the circle, on my bodice. We'll take this back to the machine and stitch everything up. We will now take the uninterfaced band piece, so again that's piece number 9, and you'll see here that I have marked the double notches right here and then the single notch right here. What you will be doing is taking the single notched edge, folding it up along the seam line, so that will be 5/8 of an inch, and pressing along here, and then trimming this edge to 3/8. This will help to create a facing for the band. So here I have the seam pressed up, and I am trimming the 1/4 inch to make it 3/8 of an inch. Now please, 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 please don't call the sewing police on me, but I usually just eyeball this when I'm doing the trimming. So I'll just continue to trim and try to keep it even. Now for you, if you're not comfortable with this method, you can definitely measure it and trim that way. But for me, I'll just eyeball it. But if you don't tell and share the secret, then I won't tell and share the secret. So voila, it's not super, super perfect, but it's pretty precise. And we have that 3/8 lined up right there. We will now attach this facing to the waistband. So again, you can see that I have the double, well, just trust me here, you have the double notch right here. You will again attach that to the double notch with the right side of the band facing against the wrong side of the bodice, and you will pin this together. Now just make sure that you are pinning it appropriately, because this is not typically what we do. Usually we have right sides together for everything, but this is a right side of the facing going against the wrong side of the bodice. And so I'll just pin those together. And you'll be using the same landmarks that you did to pin the interfaced piece to the bodice. So just make sure that all of your centers and your squares match up where they are supposed to go. And as you can see, that is together, and it'll be a similar concept to what we've done with the previous facings, where once you have this stitched together, you will be folding this part down and you will be slip stitching this over the skirt when we get to that part. So go ahead and take this to your machine, stitch the facing onto the bottom of the bodice, and I'll meet you back here for our skirt construction. We are now starting the construction of the skirt. I have piece number 10, which is our skirt front. We'll do a little bit of an orientation here. Here is the part that will attach to the waistband of the bodice. This is the center seam, and then over here is the side seam. When we start thinking about putting this together, the first thing that we're going to need to do is to construct our pleats. Now, I have my markings done on the wrong side of the fabric. With pleating, it is actually easier to do the marking on the outside. However, if you choose to do that, you absolutely positively have to make sure that you have marked it with something that is easily removable, or else you'll end up with shadows or leftover markings from these pleating marks. So I'm going to go ahead and separate this, and we will start the pleating. For the sake of the video, I went ahead and transferred the markings to the right side of my skirt just to make it easier for everyone to see. So what we will be doing is creasing along this line where the small circles are and bringing it toward the center. So that's our center where the larger circles are. So we'll go ahead and crease and fold over, and that created one pleat. We'll have to do this a few more times. And again, for the next one, you'll need to crease along the line of the small circle and then fold over. And you'll continue to do that until all of the pleats are completed. So now you can see that I have all of my pleats done for both sides of the skirt front. We'll take this to the machine, we'll baste across the top to keep them together, and after that we'll be taking piece number 11, which is the skirt back. For the skirt back, you will be sewing the center back seam and then doing all of the pleats across the top. It will be very similar to the technique that I just showed you. So let's all go to our machines, baste across the top for the front, complete the skirt back, and I'll meet you back here. The pockets are for views A and B. If you are making C or D, you can skip this step. You'll take pocket piece number 12 and use the notch seen here to match with the notch on the side seams of each front skirt piece, as well as both sides of the back skirt. For the pocket seams, we'll need to be using a 1/4 inch seam, and so mine is marked on my machine, but if yours is not, you can always mark it directly on your fabric or use a seam guide to help you. So let's get these pockets attached to the side seams. The seam will be pressed toward the pocket. So I now have one of my front pieces ready attached to the back piece of my skirt. So I will be taking the pieces and matching up the seams on the side, and please note that I've already pressed over the pocket seams toward the pocket. So I will be pinning these together. Because I have the pocket bulk on this side, it will be blocking my seam guides on the machine. And because of that, what I have gone ahead and done is marked the actual seam allowance on the skirt so that I can see where I need to be stitching to create my 5/8 seam. I'll be stitching from the top to the circle, and then from this bottom circle to the entire rest of the seam. So let's get started with that. So one entire side seam is done. The next step is to sew the two pocket pieces together to form your pocket. I usually do a little bit of pinning in this area, but not too much. This will be entailing sewing around a curve, so you'll want to take this slowly, but you will be still doing a 5/8 of an inch seam. We have gotten so much done on this project that I just want to do a quick recap to set us up for the next steps. So as you can see, I have the bodice sitting here with the wrong side out. This is the waistband that has the carriers, and then this is the waistband facing. In this next step, it is going to be super important to keep this waistband facing free. You don't want to get that caught up in the sewing part of it. So now we'll bring in the skirt, and this is the center seam of the skirt, which I will be matching with this center mark that I made on the waistband. So we'll go ahead and we'll pin that together. The other mark that you do want to look for is the single notch that is marked both on the skirt as well as the waistband. You'll be matching those two together. And then you'll just want to go ahead and make sure that the pockets are facing toward the front, which mine are. So this pocket is facing toward the front, and then just continue to pin the entire waistband. If anything seems to not be matching properly, it means that you'll probably need to go ahead and readjust your pleats. Okay, and now we are ready to take this to the machine and attach the bodice to the skirt. I'll come to one of my favorite parts of any dress project, and that's when you attach the bodice to the skirt. So the next step that you'll need to do is to make a nice neat finish of the waistband by folding the facing over the waistband and slip stitching. After that, you'll want to go ahead and try on the dress and decide how much of a hem you want to make. And so the method of your hemming depends on your fabric. So you might want to do a blind hem or a double fold hem. So it really just matters what type of fabric you're using and what look you're going for. After that, we'll be attaching the front bands to start doing our work on the buttons. Now, one of the things that you may want to do is you may want to end up hemming your dress at the end, and that's okay too. It's just that in these particular instructions for this dress, they do mention doing the hem at this stage of the dress making. We are now going to prepare our front band piece. You should have cut out 2 of piece number 17 and interfaced both pieces. So what we will do is find the notch on piece number 17, and as you can see, I have marked the notch over there. And on the opposite side of the notch, you will be folding up 5/8 of an inch, pressing that, and then trimming it down to 3/8 of an inch. We've done that on a few different steps thus far, and so it's just the same technique. You will press down 5/8 of an inch, and then you will do some trimming to reduce the bulk. The front band has now been prepared with the pressed under 5/8 that has been trimmed. So we will once again be finding our notch, which I have marked over here, and you will be matching that to the notch with the right sides together on the bodice of your dress. So we will pin that. And you will pin the entire thing all the way down the length of the dress. So we've now pinned the front band to the entire length of the front of the dress. And once you stitch that, you will be pressing those seams toward the front band and trimming these seams to give you a nice reduction in the bulk. In order to finish the bottom where the hem is located, the next step involves folding the front band along the fold line and then stitching across the bottom right here. Now that we have stitched across this bottom edge, we will need to trim a little bit of the excess off. And then you will take this edge and you will flip it from the outside to the inside. And that will provide you with a very neat finish to the bottom. Of course, you know the next step is going to be our usual slip stitching this facing over the seam. As with any curved edge in this project, as well as curved edges in general, we will be stay stitching this neckline to help it keep its shape. So the stay stitching will be about a 1/2 inch from the raw edge. All right, we have now come into the point of the project where we will be working on the collar, which is piece number 18. So for the collar, you should have one piece that has no interfacing and then another piece that does have interfacing. What you will be doing is putting these pieces with the right sides together. And then stitching the entire edge from this marking up here, which was a circle, all the way around the unmarked edge all the way up, and then you will be leaving the double notched edge free. We have now sewn both the interface side of the collar as well as the uninterfaced side of the collar together, and before turning so that the right sides are facing out, we will want to trim these edges to help ensure that we have a nice sharp pointed corner of our collar. So I usually clip straight across the point and then do a little bit of graduated clipping toward that edge. You do need to be super careful that you do not clip through the stitches. That would be a problem. So now we'll go ahead and we'll turn the collar out. And we can definitely use a little tool to help pull that collar out a little bit more. And then we'll do the same over here, which has already been cut. So from here, we'll go ahead and we will press this collar so it is nice and flat. We now have our collar turned out and pressed, and as you can see, the edges are sharp, the corner is pointy, so this is going to be a beautiful collar. Our next step is to go ahead and make the collar and collar band sandwich. So the collar band is piece 19. You should have one piece that is not interfaced and prepped the same way that we've prepped all of our pieces like this that are becoming a facing. So I've already turned up the 5/8 of an inch seam and then trimmed it so that way we only have 3/8 of an inch left. And then you'll have an interfaced collar band piece. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, but what will happen here is you'll be pinning the uninterfaced collar band piece to the interfaced collar piece. And you'll be doing this with the right sides together, and you'll be leaving the neck edge free. So we'll be pinning this piece all the way across, matching our markings. So I've matched the double notches here. The center is well matched. And then the second set of double notches here. And then you'll match the circles with the edge. Now, to create the other part of our sandwich, we will be putting the interfaced piece right sides together with the uninterfaced piece of the collar. And you'll be matching it in a similar fashion. So you'll want to match the centers as well as the double notches. Okay. So once you have all of that pinned together, you will be stitching straight across the top of this piece. And once this is all stitched up, this will be a great opportunity to do some top stitching. Top stitching is completely optional, but you can top stitch around this edge to help give it a more finished, a little fancier look, a little bit more pizzazz. We now have our collar attached to our collar band, and this is the neckline of the dress. So we will now be matching the interfaced section of the collar band to the neckline of the dress. First, we'll be matching the center markings, so the center marking there and center marking there, with the right sides together. You want to find your single notches and match the notch to the notch. You want to make sure that you do keep this facing free. And the other thing that you'll want to take a look at is whether or not you need to do some clipping of the neckline. So depending on how much give your fabric has, there may be just a little bit of stress and strain on the neckline, and that is something that happens. The way to take care of it is just to clip. You clip just a little bit. Make sure that you don't go through the stay stitching. As we said, the stay stitching is there to help keep the shape of the neckline. So I did have to do a little bit of clipping there. So we have finally arrived to some of the last steps of putting together the shirt dress from McCall's pattern 6696. So the most recent thing that we did was put the collar on, and you'll need to go ahead and press these seams to help them get to be a little bit flatter. We'll then slip stitch this edge of the collar facing over the seam to create a neat finish, as we have in so many steps of this shirt dress pattern. So the last thing that we'll need to do is to go ahead and attach our buttons, which I know can be intimidating and a little bit scary, but a few tips to help things make a little bit easier. First thing is I would mark your buttonhole and your button markings on the right side of the fabric. This just helps you to visualize things a whole lot easier. On this side, I've used some stickers that are very easily removable, and on this side, I've used a heat erasable pen. No matter what method you choose, just make sure that it's something that won't scar or leave a mark on your fabric. So just follow those markings to help you decide where you put your buttons and your buttonholes. Now, to attach the actual buttons, you will be using your buttonhole foot. And typically what you do is you take your button and you insert it into the sizer of the buttonhole foot, which will help to get the correct size button set by the machine. And then you'll attach this foot to your machine and then just follow the instructions for your machine. Everybody's is a little bit different, but those tend to be the general steps.
here we have our buttonhole done. The next step is to use a seam ripper to open it up. Just make sure that you don't go through the end stitches. So take this pretty slowly. Now that you've sewed on your buttons, we are finally done. We have put in a lot of great work on this project. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that you learned a lot along the way. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And as a reminder, everything that you saw in this video can be purchased at Minerva. Have a great day.